All right, so we're going to do a series of videos kind of working through each of the acts. Now, these are not going to be super in-depth, but they are going to be things that you should be noting as you have read the text, okay? So as you've read Act 1, we are now going to go through Act 1, kind of talk about some of the things that we should be seeing and that we should be noticing within this act of reading Shakespeare's Othello. Um, so we will do one of these for each of the acts, and then we will kind of take that, make sure that your analysis of it is sort of on par for where I'm trying to go with the class. If not, you will then, of course, remember and learn from this process. Now, I will try to go speedily through this, so you feel free to absolutely pause and take notes where you need and listen to this in a numerous amount of times. All right, so without further ado, during this time, let's do Shakespeare's Othello. So, why does Shakespeare start not with Othello? He doesn't start with Othello. He starts instead with a villain. He starts with Iago. We start in the middle of the action with Iago, and Iago is our villain. And in fact, of all of Shakespeare's play, he's one of the most interesting villains in literature. He is definitely somebody that actors want to portray. He's definitely one of the most complex characters, and one of the most hated characters in all of literature. And here at this beginning, we learn to already hate Iago quite a bit. Um, he gives us a reason why he actually distastes Othello and why he doesn't like Othello at the very beginning. So at the very beginning, we're getting this sense of conflict already between these two men. So let's read this real quick. So I'm going to read from like 9s to 21. So despise me if I do not. Three great ones of the city in personal suit to make me his lieutenant. Off cap to him, and by faith of man, I know my price. I'm worth no worse a place. But he is loving his own pride and purposes, evades them with the bombast circumstance, horribly stuffed with epithets of war. And in conclusion, none suits my mediators, for Certes, says he, have I already chose my officer, and what was he? Forsooth, a great arithmetician, one Michael Cassio, a Florentine, a fellow almost damned in a fair wife. So here we have right away, Iago is in complete dislike of Othello because he was passed up for a promotion. Othello could have promoted him, and yet he didn't. He promoted Cassio instead. So that's the reason that Iago gives. Now, whether or not that's actually true, I mean, it is to some extent probably true, but we're going to see that there's much more to this villain all throughout. Now, just because there is an extended metaphor here that Iago uses, and it's the first one in the play, I kind of want to look at it. It's a pretty interesting metaphor. um, so he says, as masterly as he, this is lines, let's start with line 25, and we're talking about the process of his ambition, and how it was stopped by Cassio. More than a spinster and less the bookish theoric, wherein the tug's counsels can propose, as masterly as he, mere prattle without practice. In all his soldiership, but he, sir, had the election, and I, of whom his eyes had seen the proof at Rhodes, at Cyprus, and on other grounds, Christian and heathen, must bleed and calmed by bedettor and creditor, this countercaster. He in good time must his lieutenant be. Okay, so there's this sort of sailing and nautical terms that are being used here, and Iago creates this picture as he's talking to Rodrigo about how he's sailing towards his ambition, and then all of a sudden, what Cassio does is cut him off, and so his sail is not able to take the wind, and his ambition is not able to go through. And so, what's interesting here as we look at it, we start thinking about, okay, well, what does this mean? What does this mean? We're going to realize that he has a dislike, and for both Othello and Cassio, and that he blames them both for his not being able to procure his ambition. So as the play breaks in, We realize that Rodrigo is saying, "Hey, you've already told me that you hate this guy. So can you tell me more about that?" And so we know that this conversation is a breaking into a conversation. It's in media res. It's breaking in the middle of some action here, and that action is that this has been a continued conversation. Iago's already been hating Othello. He's now just going to be telling Rodrigo why, and even that reason why may not be the best reason, but it's at least what Iago's able to justify his hate for. Um, so right away, we get the sense of Iago's this guy who talks about people bad behind their back. He has no problem talking about how much he dislikes people. And he is going to be known as sort of a two-faced character. What drives through Iago throughout the play is a sort of manipulative duplicity that is inherent in his nature. He's one thing in front of people, and he's another thing behind their backs. And this sort of duality between his face and his internal ideas. There's this disconnection. Samuel Taylor Coleridge actually called this the motiveless malignancy, because as the play progresses, yes, now Iago's given a reason, but as the play progresses, it seems like he's just evil to be evil. He's just evil because he just wants to be evil, and that's just who he is and his character, and that's one of the reasons that he's really considered such a great villain. Now, he has already made the implication that Othello did not choose to do the choice for Iago as an appropriate choice. He had people sent to suck up to Othello in his name, and he blames Othello for making a bad decision here. And so he doesn't only hate Othello; he hates Cassio too. So it's a bit of setup here for the way that Iago is going to go about attacking them later on within the play. So Iago feels that he has been denied the promotion to lieutenant by a man that never did set a squadron in a field nor division a battle knows. What's interesting here is that it's actually because of those things, because of all the things that Iago says Cassio doesn't have, Cassio actually has all those things, and it's because of those things specifically that Othello chooses him. So what's interesting there is that this obviously is a person who's ignorant, who is experiencing some form of cognitive dissonance. And yes, it's okay to be upset, like, hey, if you don't get a promotion and maybe you need to blow off some steam. But here is a person with Iago. It doesn't seem that his emotion has gotten to him as much as his emotion hasn't gotten to him as much as it is. He just is not uh, aware of the dislike and his own bias towards this situation. So it's no surprise when Iago, he says to Rodrigo, "I am not what I am," which is this assertion that there's this outward action and it's different than the internal idea that he's going. So in other words, he's just saying, "Hey, I'm super two-faced. You need to watch me. I'm going to act one way, but I'm really thinking this other way, and I'm doing that because I want to achieve this sort of peculiar end." Now, this is going to establish one of the recurring motifs all throughout the play. This idea of deception, this idea of duplicity, this idea of um, being one thing and just one thing in front of people and another thing behind them, being two-faced. The different faces that we each give, and how Iago's going to use that in order to win trust. He's going to use that to get confidence, and at the same time, he's going to use that to remain beyond reproach, which is sort of the beauty of his sinisterism. He's able to do it in such a way that doesn't really cause him um, negative damage. So, the "I am not what I am," it's obviously a biblical allusion here. This is an allusion to the name that Yahweh gives himself first at the burning bush. When Moses says, "Well, who should I tell them, who you are?" And God's basic answer to him is, "I am. I am who I am." Um, That's the idea, this sort of sense of honesty, this sort of sense of I am that which is constantly being. And so it's a huge illusion here that Shakespeare is giving by saying, I am not what I am. It really shows um, in a sort of symbolic and interesting imagery way of using the illusion that Iago is sort of the anti-god. He's sort of the evil one throughout this play, and he's already giving us that um, as a noticeable thing that's going to be happening by using the line this way. So, how does Iago hate people? Well, we need to look at lines 78 through 80. This is the way that he plans on getting back at Othello. What he's done here is he's basically saying, "Hey, we're going to call up Brabantio, which is Desdemona's father, and I know that you've already read Act One, but Desdemona being, of course, Othello's love. But Iago says, "Let's call up her father, rouse him, make after him, poison his delight, proclaim him in the streets, incense her kinsman, and though he in a fertile climate dwell, plague him with flies, though that his joy be joy, yet throw such chances of vexation on it as it may lose some color. Plague him with flies, that which is joy be joy, yet throw such chances of vexation on it as it may lose some color." This is death by 1,000 cuts. Iago is not the type of sinister, evil person that's just going to stab you and let you go. Boom, you're dead. That's the end, right? This is much more of a distaste, and this isn't even towards Othello. This is towards Brabantio. This is just the way that he wants to upset Brabantio. He wants to ruin the little good things in life. This is the type of evil, sinister thing that we're seeing. This isn't even him showing his evilness, right? This is just him planning and plotting, but it's already coming out. It's already there. And that's the way that Iago is going to kill people, by tiny little cuts, just itching and etching and etching into them. So Iago tells Brabantio that even now, very now, an old black ram is tupping your white ewe. The repetition of the word now stresses the immediacy of the action, which Iago intends in order to create chaos and confusion. He's sort of saying, hey, it's happening right now. And this is animal imagery. It's animal sexuality happening, and it's serving an extreme purpose here for Iago. First, it reveals Iago's perception of love as a purely animal sexual act. Now, that tells us a lot about Iago. It tells us a lot about how Iago feels about the nature of love as it is. And that should tell you that this is not a guy who understands the better good things in life. In fact, I would even maybe go out even so far to say is that Iago is simply lacking in emotion in such a way that he could be some sort of sociopath or whatever. And this is not to degrade people out there that are wonderful citizens that do deal with those sort of lack of emotions, but here we see that this is a person who is violent and evil, and yet that's what seems to get through it, and he can't understand love. And it's a picture hardly appropriate also to give to a dad. I mean, like, here's a guy. I want you to imagine for a second. Here's this guy, and he goes up to the father of a young woman, and he says, "Hey, do you know who's basically having sex with your daughter right now and doing it in a way that you would not approve of?" It's also degrading the love between Othello and Desdemona, and he focuses on three things: old, black, and ram. So he's stressing Othello's age, the age difference between them. He's emphasizing his color, and we're going to talk about racism here in a second. And he's going to strip him of his humanity in Brabantio's presence. He's turning Othello into an animal, and we see that this is actually very addictive to Brabantio in scene 2. Now, let's talk about this racism that we see. There's a few different lines here. First in line 35, "And I, God bless the mark, his morship's ancient." Okay, this is Iago talking about who he is, and instead of saying lordship, he says morship. And that's, of course, just a extreme racial slander that he's using, um, just a slur, a play on word slur. And then in line 73, Rodrigo shows how much of a racist he is. What a fool fortune does the thick lips owe if he can carry it thus. Now, Rodrigo obviously has been denied his love for Desdemona and wants her back, but he is not above being a complete racist to do that to gain what what he wants. It just shows who he is. Um, and then, of course, in line 97, an old black ram is tapping your white ewe. Arise, arise. This is Iago telling Brabantio that Othello is an animal, and he focuses on the color, the black ram, doing that. And then, of course, and this is all in the very first scene. Of course, in line 125, because we come to you, do your service, and you think we are ruffians, you'll have your daughter covered with a Barbary horse. You'll have your nephews neigh to you. You'll have coursers for cousins and jennets for Germans. So a Barbary horse Barbary is, first of all, a region in Africa, and he's suggesting Othello's homeland here. But once again, he's referring to this act of sexual exploitation. And if you look at it throughout the scene, it gets worse and worse and worse. In the first part, they're really, he doesn't understand love, and then he puts it as um, two animals being sexual together. And then here at the end with the Barbary horse, he's actually comparing Desdemona and a horse together. So it's gone from being symbolic to being an actual act of bestiality. He actually degrades Othello to the point that this is a real sense of bestiality. He does not consider Othello a person, and so there's quite a bit of racism in this first scene, and it's something that we want to contend with more later on. Now, scene 2. So the opening of scene 2 also echoes with the statement, "I am not what I am." It's reminding us that Iago is still just straight out evil, and there is this sort of subtleness of comparing him, of course, to God as the sort of anti-God of the play. But here we see Iago also on the level of "I am not what I am," actually acting it out by going to Othello and being like, "Hey, this is going to happen." He's warning him about Brabantio, and it's making him look good to Othello. And Othello totally thinks that Iago is a trustworthy person. What we notice here is that sort of the racism that Iago had in the first scene has sort of been contagioned to Brabantio. He talks about the constant act that he believes Othello has used magic and potions and stuff to make Desdemona uh, fall in love with him. So that's sort of the setting up of the scene. It's this real quick scene. Iago comes in, says, "Hey, Othello, letting you know they're coming," and then they get reports that Othello needs to go meet with the Duke, that's the king, and talk about some war stuff. Then Brabantio enters in with sort of mob squad of people ready to like take down Othello, and Othello's like, "Yo, just follow me here. Let's go talk to the Duke about this." And we notice that Othello is actually really going to be very honest this whole time. So in scene 3, Brabantio's claim to the Duke that Othello uses spells and medicines. He talks about this sort of round, unvarnished tale, and also just in scene 2, we just to reiterate that he does tell in lines 89, "Run from her guarded to the sooty bosom of such a thing as thou, to fear not to delight." Okay, so once again, you have that racism sort of coming through. And it carries on to scene 3 as he says that, "Hey, listen, right now Othello is using magic to get my daughter to marry him. And then, of course, Desdemona comes in later because the Duke is like, hey, let her hear it. And actually, it was Othello's idea. It says, yes, I did this. And why don't you go get my wife? We're married now. And let's see what she has to say. So Desdemona's subsequent assertion is that she is in love with the Moor, and and she even tells why. And the Duke's, clearly shows that Othello's in the right here. So So I want to take just a quick segue to talk about foil characters. As we've already set up two pretty good ones here, and then another pair is coming. So in literature, a foil character is just somebody that shows qualities that are in contrast with qualities of another character. It does not mean that they are the opposite, though. What it means is that they show a comparison between the two characters. So if you ever watch um, movies where there's a villain and there's always like the little villains below them, right? The little villains can never be as bad as the villain, and a lot of times they're stupid, whereas the villain is smart. This is creating a sense of foil character. It shows the more evilness of or the quality of evil in the bigger villain compared to the smaller ones. So we've already seen that a bit in scene one with Rodrigo and Iago. They're obviously a good sense of foil characters. But here you really do have in scene three, this whole focus has been on how Iago is two-faced. And here Othello really takes on an honest look. He really says, yeah, listen, I'm totally in love with Desdemona. I have married her. He's very confrontational and says, yeah, this is who I am. So we see that there's a real sense of Othello being honest compared to Iago, who's not. Um, and at the end of scene three, we have Iago sort of talking about love and how he doesn't get love and how he doesn't understand love. And it's a pretty interesting little connection here. But he expresses his attitude, and he says that it's not in his virtue to experience it. So Iago's immediate reaction, and remember, Rodrigo, once they're duped, once Desdemona says, "Hey, I do love Othello," and the Duke is declared Othello just to be just fine, and then says, "Hey, you can take your wife to Cyprus as you're going to go fight now." Um, Rodrigo wants to then just go kill himself. He says, "I can't do that." And Iago's like, "Are you an idiot? What are you doing?" Um, so there's this real misunderstanding about the emotion, and Iago doesn't get that emotion that Rodrigo is going through. And luckily, it's helpful for Rodrigo in this sense. But Iago says that love is merely a lust of the blood and the permission of the will. He simply can't comprehend love in terms of its virtue because he cannot rise above the level of his own baseness. Evil is what's real to Iago, not love. And that's a really interesting connection that Shakespeare does for us in showing us the impossibility of Iago understanding that which is good, and that might show the extent of the evilness of his character. Iago then suggests that to Rodrigo that Othello will tire of Desdemona, that the food that is to him now as luscious as locusts will become. By the way, that's also another biblical allusion. Is living off the locust, shortly as bitter as Calocantida. Likewise, when Desdemona is sated with his body, she will turn to somebody else. And so the specific imagery of food and appetite with respect to love is significant because it shows that Iago reduces love to merely a sexual appetite void of emotion. Which it's interesting because if you think about it, a lot of cultures have many words for love, and yet here in America, we actually only typically connect love to the idea of sexuality or eros. It says if something that's going on between two people, it's always that sort of connecting, and that's the way it's sold in the market and as a commodity. And then at the end of scene three, there is the soliloquy that Iago gives. And we discover there may be something more to the reason that Iago hates Othello. And that is that there's this rumor that Emilia and Othello had adultery, and we'll see this, and Iago and Amelia, of course, being in a relationship, and that Othello sort of entered his sheets, Iago's sheets, the bed sheets, and that may be another reason that Iago um, is so full of hatred, and if so, this is a question we need to contend with: is that a justifiable reason to hate somebody? I mean, if Othello really has truly had an affair with the person that he is in a relationship with, is that going to be a justified reason? And it also lets us know that as much as Iago may have a sort of rational sense to him and is just evil to be evil, there was at least a point in which there is probably some sense of jealousy inside of him. So that's really Act One in a nutshell. It's quite a quite a bit of a talking through, but we will continue to do this, and we will continue to talk about each of the acts as we work through them. Um, Feel free to go back, take notes wherever you need. Use this as much as you need for your work that you will be doing in class.